We stay in a hotel that's incredible. It's in the mountains. You would have seen it on a debrief last year. But primarily, I don't even think there is a menu. It's schnitzel of various types. Why wasn't Lewis's second stop earlier, despite having the gap to Valtteri? That second stop we completed for Lewis wasn't one for strategic purposes. It wasn't one to convert to what you traditionally call a two-stop strategy. It was there for the fastest lap attempt. And you need to do it such that Verstappen isn't able to cover you the next lap. So if you did it one lap earlier, Verstappen would have stopped one lap later and both would have had an opportunity of going for fastest lap. If we look at the question more broadly, why didn't we two-stop with Lewis? It was there as a consideration, not just for Lewis, but for Valtteri as well, all the way through the race. The problem is that the undercut power there was fairly small, around 1.5 seconds. If you look at this race trace, you can see that relative to Verstappen, we fell behind by such a margin that we just weren't close enough to execute a successful two-stop. We could have done. We could have stopped Lewis early on the first stint and then converted to a two-stop in the second. But the problem was Verstappen would have been able to cover both times. The result of that would have been that the position change wouldn't have happened. And what we decided to do instead was look at trying to push so long in the stint that we're able to potentially take the tyres off a cliff for Verstappen. If we held a degradation advantage, something that we had at races prior to this, maybe we'd be able to force them into an uncomfortable situation. Now, as it turns out, we were pushing really hard during the course of the race and we fell off the tyre curve towards the end of the race as well. It was our best attempt. We were trying to close that gap back to Verstappen such that we could get within undercut range. But by doing so, we just didn't have any tyres left and dropped off. Why didn't Valtteri stop for a second time? Similar sort of range to what we discussed with Lewis. With Valtteri, we were evaluating this two-stop all the way through the race. And there was a period where actually we thought the tyre degradation was on course for a two-stop strategy. Now, if you look at the gap view, you can see Valtteri was holding a gap of around about 3 seconds. We built it up from 1.9 to 2.5 to 3 seconds, and we held it there. And the reason why we were briefing Valtteri to do that is we were making sure that should it go towards a two-stop, we had enough gap relative to Perez that we could stop one lap afterwards and still cover him. The same situation of Lewis, but in the inverse. We then got more and more data on that hard tyre, more and more degradation data, and there's models in the background that are being updated live. The result of that was that we could see that it was very much still on a one-stop strategy in terms of degradation, and more so than that, Perez had a small pace advantage relative to Valtteri. The significance of that is if we were to stop and convert to a two-stop, we would move Valtteri out of that podium position now back into fourth, and we simply wouldn't have the pace to be able to catch back up and overtake. Now, you saw what happened in the inverse, and indeed we turned out to be right thing not to stop. Perez did stop, and he did have incredible pace, but it wasn't enough. Had the race been 2 laps longer, it would have been, but it wasn't. So our prediction of where we were on the two-stop versus the one was correct, and had we stopped, we would have committed Valtteri to fourth. What was the vibration Lewis was mentioning over the radio? And why did he drop back to Verstappen as a result of it? The vibration Lewis was talking about came from 2 very different effects. On the front tyres, we had blistering. Blistering is when the tyre gets very, very warm, and you can see a black line forming around the circumference of it, and it's in one location. And it's simply that tyre is working very hard and operating at a very warm temperature. It isn't something, however, that will cause a reliability issue or concern over failure. It's a minor performance effect. On the rear tyres, we had what's called pickup. And pickup, again, you can see it as sort of a black mark, but the difference now is you can see it moving across the width of the tread as he goes through a corner and exits the corner. Pickup is rubber that's been scraped off another car as it goes through a corner. As we corner, you take a layer of rubber off, and effectively you can sometimes on TV see it just being flicked off, flicked up. And again on TV, you can see around the edges of the track the marbles that have been created by this. And that's what the pickup is. The pickup is effectively old rubber, but we drive through it on warm tyres and pick it up. And over a period of time, it will add weight to a tyre and therefore vibration. So the 2 effects, the one at the front and the one at the back, are obviously very different in their nature. Neither one a reliability concern, and neither one, truthfully, was the reason why Lewis dropped off relative to Verstappen. Lewis was pushing flat out all the way through that second stint, and we dropped off simply because we didn't have the car pace to be able to keep up and push at that rate. Will you be looking to add any more extra performance to this year's car, or is your focus fully on next year's 2022 new regulation set? The answer is this package has a number of ways that we can improve it. We still have more performance that we can add to it, and aerodynamic improvements are just one facet of car performance. We have other elements of this car that we can add performance to, and that we are continuously doing so. Furthermore, you can always optimize and improve the package you have. You don't normally extract everything out of it from word go. Every time you run on track and get more and more information and data, you learn a little bit more about how to use the car, how to use the tires, and how to optimize the package together. The result of that is that, yes, in terms of big aerodynamic upgrades, will they be reduced for us, but not just us, all teams this year? I suspect so. However, that doesn't mean that the car performance will be static and staying where it is. And it also doesn't mean that just because at this one event we had a deficit to Red Bull, that will be maintained across the season. There's a few elements of Austria. First of all, it's at a higher altitude. It does change things somewhat. Second of all, year on year, it hasn't necessarily been the strongest track for us. And you take those into account when you look at the broad season that we have coming up and the different circuit characteristics coming up. I think it's fair to say that the regulations next year, and especially under a cost cap, are going to be challenging for every single team. There is a trade-off. For every millisecond you put on this year's car, you're probably losing the same or more on next year's car. That trade-off will be difficult to make for every team up and down the grid. But here's what we can promise you. We are here to fight for this year's championship as much as we are next year's. Until it's over, we'll be fighting with all of our heart until the end of this season. Given Red Bull are running less rear wing than you are across the season to date, have you considered doing something similar to that, or changing your setup to adapt and gain more speed on the straights? We have a suite of rear wings available to us, as do Red Bull and as do other teams on the grid. You need to. You've got circuits like Monaco where you need high downforce, you need the biggest rear wing that you can fill into the legal box. And then you've got races like Monza, where you need that straight line speed. That's the optimum balance between downforce and speed. And that's the key point. Each track has its own set of characteristics. You could, of course, have less rear wing and go faster in a straight line, but you would be sacrificing cornering performance. And not just that. That also comes with effects on degradation. Conversely, a less rear wing allows you perhaps to overtake a little bit more. There's a balance. We use simulation tools to run through all of the rear wing settings that we have available to us and come up with an optimum, what we should be running at this track, what we should be running for both overtaking, qualifying and race. And in our case, it comes out with the rear wing setting that you see. Yes, Red Bull's is slightly less than ours, but they also run a rear ride height that's much higher, so it's very difficult to compare what drag their car's generating relative to ours. What we know is with our car, and we have swept through this, where we're running on rear wing is optimum for lap time. And ultimately, that is what both qualifying and really the race is all about. How much can the team really improve the car in the next 4 days? From the moment where the checkered flag dropped, save for when we went to the podium to celebrate the double podium, we've already started the process of improving both what we do as a team, but also the performance of the car for the next race weekend. We have a debrief straight after the race with both drivers and the team and go through the main points of what we could have done better, what we can learn from that race, such that we can apply them with immediate effect. What we're doing is no different to what we would do whether we had 1 week, 4 days, or 2 weeks. We're there to make sure we extract everything we possibly can in terms of learning and apply it immediately for the following race weekend. This weekend's Austrian Grand Prix brings with it 2 further challenges. The first is that all the tyres will be 1 step softer. So we'll have the C5, that will now become the soft, the C4 will become the medium, and the C3 will become the hard. And as you saw, 1 stop was possible on the 2 hardest compounds, but that may be more challenging as we go into the Austrian Grand Prix. Further to that, we've got some new tyres on Friday. These tyres will come in for the Silverstone Grand Prix, but this is our opportunity to evaluate them. So it'll be a complicated program, making sure we do enough work for the future, for the Silverstone Grand Prix, whilst also completing work for the Austrian Grand Prix. That will pose a challenge, but also it will pose an opportunity. It means that the same conditions won't be repeated as they were just 1 week prior to that. Different tyres already will make things more complicated and present opportunity. Our team is very strong at being honest with ourselves, but also making sure that we have strong debriefs, and each department goes away and comes back with every single millisecond they can find from what we could have done better the week before. That's why it's fair to say that the Austrian Grand Prix may not necessarily produce the same results as they were just 1 week prior to that. There's enough difference, enough change, that opportunity for us can present itself. What happens on race day before the actual race begins, and what preparation does the team go through? For a 3 o'clock race, as it was for the Styrian Grand Prix, we're in the track for around 9 a.m. in the morning. Now that sounds like a large period of time before the race, and yet, certainly to me and to us at the track and at the factory, it disappears. It feels like a matter of minutes. The reason for that is there is a tremendous amount to do to prepare before we race in anger. Starting point was weather. You immediately have to reassess what you think the weather's going to be for the race. And obviously, the closer you are to race start time, the more accurate the prediction is. In the case of the Styrian Grand Prix, there was thunderstorms and wet weather coming in, and that would significantly change what we had to do that afternoon if it was to come in. It also had quite a strong impact on what the track temperature was going to be and the ambient were going to be. So in the morning, you're evaluating what the impact of the updated weather forecast is. We have a strategy review with the drivers, and in the morning we make sure that they're completely prepared for a number of eventualities that could happen during the race. What if it went to a two-stop? What are we looking for? What are we expecting them to do? What if Verstappen is faster? What if he's slower? What if you get into the lead of the race? What if there's a safety car on lap 5? Now, clearly you don't cover every single opportunity, but you go through the main ones such that the driver's thinking about it during the course of the race. We then have a briefing all together, all the engineers, all the factories, both Brixworth and Brackley. We bring together all of the work that's been happening overnight, because of course from the point where qualifying finishes, the work doesn't stop and in fact starts. And there's a tremendous amount to go through to allow the drivers to have a set of tools available to them to optimize the car. How to use the tyres in the most efficient manner. How and what should they be doing at the start of the race? Are there any sporting matters, for example, track limits or any other changes that have occurred overnight? There's a tremendous amount for them to understand and ensure that they have enough of a concept before they go into the race that they're prepared. From that point onwards, the drivers typically will go do some level of media. Then you'll see them around the track, normally in a parade. And during that period of time, we're further refining the work that we've done from the morning. How's the weather now? We're now just a few hours before the race. What else should we be considering? What new information has appeared? As we get towards when the cars are leaving the garage to do their laps to grid, by that point, everything's pretty much nailed down and decided, unless the weather suddenly changes. And even then, there is still enough time before that to make changes, but fundamentally really only on pressures and front wing. So the engineers during that period of time are continuously reviewing what information and data they had. As the cars do the laps to the grid and then sit on the grid, again, that's the last moment for a briefing between the engineers and drivers, and just making sure that any new information is now summarized to them in a way that's useful. Their focus from that point onwards really is about the start, and again, it's an opportunity to create focus on that area. From then onwards, they're obviously driving the car, but the work never stops in the background. We're continuously trying to optimize the strategy, which is the visible element, but also the car. And we still have the ability to change tyre compounds and change tyre pressures and change front wing angle. Powerful tools in their own right. And that's happening in the background the entire time. Apple strudel or Wiener Schnitzel? This question, sadly, is probably poorly timed. Simply because we stay in a hotel that's incredible. It's in the mountains. You would have seen it on a debrief last year. But primarily, I don't even think there is a menu. It's schnitzel of various types. And so I've had about 3 before doing this filming, and I'm a little bit saturated on schnitzel at the moment. So for me, right now, apple strudel is where I'd put my vote. Thank you very much for your questions. Brilliant. We'll answer them next week. Chev will be here. Thank you very much for all of your questions, and again, look forward to answering them after the Austrian Grand Prix next week.